are you rooting for?
I've just come from South Africa, so Roy makes a lot of sense. Look, firstly, this is a very, very unique opportunity for the Australian Rugby Business Network. Our reach tonight, due to Redback conferencing, is going global. Having just got off the plane from South Africa, some of the guys over there, they're very, very keen to obviously hear what's going on over here in Australia, but they all know, some of the guys know the guys on the stage, but certainly it's very exciting times as we go into the biggest sport event this year, the Rugby World Cup. Firstly, Rugby Business Network, over 28,000 members globally. We have reaches into countries like the USA, into Asia, obviously South Africa, UK, it's very, very big. It's mainly to do with seeing anyone in business wants to come along and see the value of listening to the unique speakers, but also the unique networks that you hopefully get connected with. From there, there's obviously the LinkedIn site, and from that LinkedIn site, you're going to grow that connection. It's very, very special, obviously, tonight that we've got some supporting partners, and the supporting partners for tonight is Royal Auto Club, Kinship Digital, Thomas International, Rhino Sports, and Burbank Sports. It's without these sort of people, these type of things don't happen, and it's very, very special. There's people even in the New York tonight, their RBN, listening to us tonight. While this is actually going on, we actually have RBN events in Melbourne, in Adelaide, in Canberra and Perth. So when this event finishes tonight, they've actually got their own speakers over there. So what we've done tonight is not only extended the brand and opportunity where it's reaching to, we've actually started off other regions for tonight, so a massive plus. Concentrating on what we've got here, there's obviously a fantastic panel. What I'm going to do is, rather than give them a profile, I'm going to introduce them, the panel one by one, through some of the questions about what they currently are and some of their past, obviously, involvement in the game. Firstly, Owen Finegan. Owen, before you've had an amazing rugby career, and now you're CEO of the Kids Cancer Project. Amazing opportunity you've taken on. It certainly must be very challenging, but mate, can you just give us a bit more background on that?
Yeah, firstly, thanks for the invite. When I heard the RBM was going global, I wanted to be a part of it, especially when it was televised, because I've got a head for radio. So, but no, yeah, I've had obviously a long career, 16 years in professional rugby, 13 as playing and then 3 coaching with the Brumbies. And then when I was in Canberra, I ran Snowy Hydro Southcare, a rescue helicopter. So I had my first stint into not-for-profit. So in April this year, I moved back to Sydney, and I've taken up a role as CEO of the Kids Cancer Project. So the Kids Cancer Project is, apart from the government, is Australia's largest funder of childhood cancer research. So this year we'll invest about $4.5 million into cancer research. So it's great organisation to be involved in. It's a great cause and something I can be passionate about. So I've really enjoyed that. And after having sort of a personal experience through a Wallaby teammate of mine, David Kiffin, whose 2-year-old son was the same age as my 2-year-old daughter when his son was diagnosed with neuroblastoma. So firsthand, I got a good experience on what that does to not only the individual and the child, but to the family and how that needs to work. So to be able to support those families through that is something I'm very keen to get involved in, and it's been exciting coming back to Sydney, and and a great role to boot.
So that's fantastic. With that in mind, what we want to do is obviously reach out to what you're doing, these projects. So what are some of the ways that potentially some of the members here could maybe get involved?
Oh, there's always lots of potential. We fund about 14 research projects across Australia. So I think that the main goal for me over the next couple of years is to build our corporate support. So when I was at Snowy Hydro Southcare, it cost about $7 million to run the rescue helicopter. We raised about 3.4 million of that, and I'd say about 1.9 was corporate support. Last year, the Kids Cancer Project raised about 12 million, and the corporate support was 75,000. So we've got over 1.2 million people that donate to the Kids Cancer Project, but we've got hundreds of thousands of people giving between $10 and $100. So, and the opportunity for us is to build that corporate support. One of the challenges is working for Kids Cancer is it's, sometimes it can be a bit in your face. So, trying to get a bit more corporate support in that. But it is a fantastic, when I look at the amount of people in Australia that have donated to this charity as well, like I said, over $1 million. It's got fantastic community support, and so I'm just hoping over the next period to encourage some corporate support. But we're also always looking for skilled volunteers for expertise in HR and IT and social media and all the components. All not-for-profits work at sort of fairly under-resourced poor. You don't spend a lot of, unlike for-profit companies, you don't spend a lot of time investing in the future, and I think that's what I need to do with this organisation, is make sure that we're building for sustainability.
Yes, there certainly is a lot of competition out there in that space, but we can follow that up with through our comms in the RBN about people wanting to look at that further. Fantastic rugby career. Where did it all start?
Started here in Sydney at Waverley College. So I went to St Charles started as a rugby league player. Played both league and union till I was in my 20s, and in the end, as a 19-year-old, it became more of a social decision. You play rugby on a Saturday, you didn't feel like getting up in the afternoon and playing rugby league on the Sunday after you've had a few beers celebrating. I was not the greatest schoolboy player, but I was very lucky when I left school to go to Randwick. A fantastic club. At the time, I still remember my first grade game. I was one of two non-internationals, and the other one was the current Australian Wallabies coach, Michael Checker. Oh. So I had a team of Tony Daly, Phil Kearns, Ewan McKenzie, Warwick War, Simon Poitevin, myself, Michael Checker, Brad Burke, Lloyd Walker, David Knox, David Campese, Peter Jorgensen, Tim Janee. You had players like Tim Kelleher in second grade, Akira Nakila on one wing. So it was a great, I think one of the questions later is about the challenges of club rugby. For me to come out of playing Colts football and playing a team like that, it was just a great way to learn how to play rugby, and it put me in a good stead. And even as a 21-year-old playing for Australia, I never really, even at that stage, thought that I'd make the Wallabies or play, but playing with that group of players gave you a belief in what you were doing. But it was also a great style of rugby, and more than anything, I enjoyed playing it.
The highlight of anybody's career would be playing in the World Cup. Not only have you played in the 99 World Cup, but you actually scored a try in the final. Just take us through what your feeling was.
I was just thinking to myself, how hard is it? You just got to run hard and tackle, and that's what we did. I remember having my parents put a barbecue on before we left at Coogee. They were living, and I had about 45 of my family there, and I actually mentioned the fact that I had a dream that I'd scored a try in the Rugby World Cup. I think with about 8 minutes to go, I passed the last pass to Ben Toon, and he scored in the corner. I was thinking maybe that's the try that I was thinking about, and it was all gone. But later in that game, I got the opportunity. I remember we had that move specifically for the French. They had Olivier Magnier at the back of the line out, and he was continuously running off the back trying to get into the 5-8. So it was a targeted play, and it actually got recalled, and someone tried to cancel it because Jeremy Paul had just come on for Michael Foley, and they didn't want him to throw to the back of the line out. So it almost wasn't a try, but everyone wants to play for their country. When you're a young rugby player, then you want to play in the World Cup. It's an opportunity once every 4 years, but so to be able to play in that, it was fantastic. And I think playing in the era of rugby that I did with the likes of Eels and Horan and Little and Stephen Larkham and George Gregan, it was a fantastic era, and that sort of capped off a great year. But 3 years earlier, I'd played my first test against the All Blacks. We decided not to watch the haka, and to say they were say they thought that was probably disrespectful is an understatement. I think it was 33-0 at half time. But as proud Wallabies, we came back and I think we won the second half 12-6.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome Owen Finegan. Our next guest, Dan Vickerman. Everyone has a great rugby career, and obviously you went and did some study. You've done lots of stuff. You're currently now with Heathley Limited, a boutique fund management company. Can you just expand on what that role is and what they're into now?
Yeah, so firstly, as Owen said, welcome and thanks for having me. Apologise first up, you're going to have to listen to me. I'm not quite as funny as Owen, so I might just have to leave the jokes there. So Heathley is a 40-year-old business. We're a property fund manager. We focus on commercial and industrial property, and over the last couple of years we've gone into the healthcare and aged care space. So Owen said they're a non-for-profit. We're very much for-profit, and we're currently raising money for our aged care fund. So my role on a day-to-day basis is more on the actual asset management side of it all. But also we've got quite a small, nimble team, so everyone's pretty hands-on in all aspects of acquisition, divestment and capital raising. So if anyone likes to invest in aged care, I'm happy for you to come straight to me afterwards.
Yeah. There's a few of them creaking up the stairs today. I just got off a plane at 3:30 from South Africa, and one thing I just learnt over there is the immense pressure on them to perform the World Cup. Can you relate to that anyway?
Not really, because I sort of left South Africa. I didn't really get picked for a lot of things, so I was sort of a bit of a late bloomer in rugby. But I do recall when I was at school in 1995 that it was the first time that South Africa had been back in the World Cup, and it was literally, it was a public holiday almost. I think they played Australia, and if I remember, in the first game, yeah. And I was at Newlands for that, and it was fantastic. So I think the culture and sort of emphasis on rugby as a national sport, not from a numbers perspective, but from a cultural perspective, is huge. And it's very much, I think Mandela embracing the Rugby World Cup in 1995 had a massive bearing and impact on the game in the country. So they'll be going in there. I think they had some phenomenal amount of people seeing them off. I don't think it's too dissimilar to what they face in New Zealand.
Well, it's everywhere you went, there was certainly a lot of the marketing was about the spirit of the country, and I was very, very blessed to be playing in South Africa in '95, and wasn't actually winning the World Cup as what it did for the country, and it was just something that was very, very special. 63 tests, the Wallabies, 3 World Cups.
Yep.
3 World Cups. You must have some highlights and some moments of some of those World Cups you wouldn't mind like to share.
I never won one. That's one that I like. And I got dropped for the final in 2003, so they haven't been.
At least you were there.
Yeah. Well, I think I think GIF, Goog, and GIF, Justin Harrison, Nathan Sharp were second rows, and I think I played all the Tri-Nations game with Sharpie in the with Dave Giffen. And then I played 3 World Cup pool games, and I got rested for Namibia. Eddie Jones, the coach, said, and I somehow never got picked again. So I classify that as being dropped rather than rested. And then 2007, lost to England in the quarter-final, another highlight. And then lost to New Zealand in the semi-final in 2011, and that was my last game. But I think going into a World Cup, to get the opportunity to play 1, let alone 3, is... it's quite a unique experience. I think that tournament is very attritional from a mental perspective, and sort of the 99 side, as Owen said, had some fantastic players, and they just timed it perfectly well. And I recall when I moved to Australia in 99, watching that game in November in a pub down in Camperdown, and then in 2000 I was lucky enough to secure a contract with the Brumbies, and I was fortunate enough to play with a lot of those guys. There was Owen himself, Dave Giffen, sort of Griggs, Steve Larkham, Rod Kafer, and a number of other players that I'd sort of idolised watching when I sort of first moved to Australia. So learnt a fair bit about the game from them, and it was, I've digressed a little bit, but that's sort of my experience to that.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't play that game against the Nibba in Adelaide. We were none for 145, and I was assistant coach of the Nibba, so we're not too good. Some of the big pinnacle games. Look, we have an Australian sport like the State of Origin and that. You've been had a unique experience in playing in the Cambridge versus Oxford game.
Yeah.
How big is that? How big an opportunity is that?
Oh, I think it's great. I suppose it's a very different experience to what you would have as a professional athlete going there. You're playing with a very diverse range of individuals. You've got the 19-year-old who's just come out of school. You've got the 30-year-old who's doing a postgraduate, and but one thing I did realise that playing that Cambridge match or against Oxford is the highlight in most of those players' careers, and the history and traditions that lead into that game from that week going into it for me was pretty unique and special. I mean, I played in 2 of the games, lost one, won one, and just what you do and what is associated with was something that I won't forget. I think, Smithy, you played in that game too, and I can attest to anyone else I've spoken to who's had the opportunity is one of the highlights. So from a physical perspective, the game's not all that hard, but I think from the enjoyment and the historical and traditions that go with it, for me, that was something I won't forget.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dan Vickerman. And next guest, Brian Smith. Having played for Australia and Ireland and played rugby league and been coaching all the world, you are now the director of rugby at Scots College, one of Australia's famous rugby nurseries. How's all that going?
Not too bad, Skeggsy. We've had a good season. We've got a growing program, but our first team shared the premiership with Newington this year, and it was our 3rd premiership back to back. So it's the first time the college has managed to do that. So I've been pretty lucky, really, to walk in on the back of a really good foundation, and the opportunity for us now, I guess, is to turn 2 or 3 years of good footy into 10 years of good footy and have some sort of genuine legacy, which is, if you think about Australian rugby, you think about the Randwick era and the Brumbies era that these boys were a part of, and that's obviously what we're aspiring to try and build at Scots. Joey's have owned that sort of space for a long time, so we're upsetting a few people along the way, but we're enjoying that as well.
Yeah, yep, here. Schoolboy rugby, what's your impressions? I mean, it seems to be fairly fun.
I've got to say, I really enjoyed my own schoolboy experience. So Scots has been a brilliant opportunity for me because it's given my family the opportunity to come back to Australia. We set off to, I was actually coaching these boys at the Brumbies and didn't listen to their advice when they said, you'll never be able to work with Michael Foley, and I said I can work with anyone, and then so I went over to Bath to work with Foles, and after halfway through the first season, we're pretty much having punch-ups at training in front of the players. So I needed to move on, and I was just saying, we had George Gregan come to our rugby dinner the other night, and I was saying to Griggs I was too embarrassed to come home, to be honest, because I knew everyone, all the boys who said, mate, you should really think hard about leaving Canberra. Anyway, so I was telling George I was too embarrassed to come home, so I thought I had to stick it out until I actually had some form of success over there, and it took me 13 years before I was finally able to come home.
Yep. I actually played in the same team as Foley, and we had fights, so I must have been pretty interested in trying to coach with him. Very unique opportunity. You've played for Australia and Ireland. How do you...
Yeah, it was an interesting time. I spent a lot of time on the bench for Australia. I think I'm one of the most capped bench players, or non-capped bench players.
Chris Whittaker.
Pretty much after Witts and Peter Slattery. So being behind Michael as a 10 and Michael Liner as a 10 and Nick Farr-Jones as a 9, it was an opportunity for me to go and do some study at university. Billy Calcraft, who's here tonight, had had sort of already done that, and Ian Williams, and I think Billy Campbell as well. So then after that 84 Grand Slam tour, a few of the boys stuck around in the UK and went to Oxford, and it seemed like a good idea maybe to duck over there for a year, and that turned into 3 years. So there's a recurring theme here. I mean to go to the UK on a short-term basis and end up staying a bit longer. So that was a good opportunity, and while I was there, by chance, my philosophy tutor was beside, not my shrink, was sitting beside the Irish coach who actually needed the shrink at that time, rest his soul, Jimmy Davidson, and my heritage on my mum's side, mum's from a big Irish Catholic family, and in those days, you know, Topo was playing for Australia, having already played for Argentina, etc. So it's wherever you played your provincial rugby. So I played in Dublin, and then managed to play the interprovincial series and end up with an emerald green shirt at the end of it, which I must say I'm very proud of. But I'm not an Irishman, I'm an Australian, and so in hindsight, I think it was possibly a decision made by a 21-year-old when, you know, all you could see was the Parc de France and bloody Murrayfield and Twickenham and Lansdowne Road, and so I'm not sure it was the right thing to do at the time, but made the call, and I've got no regrets.
It obviously knew the anthem quite well.
Skeggsy's being smart now, because in those back then, yeah, I know. It's crazy, isn't it?
It runs.
So back then, basically what would happen, you'd go out into the pitch at Lansdowne Road, and there'd be, you know, the French national anthem, which is absolutely fantastic, and then we'd have to sing Danny Boy, because obviously rugby unites Ireland, and in those times, they were troubled times. I mean, there was, you know, it was metal detectors at the airport and all that sort of stuff going on in the late 80s, early 90s, and so there was no national anthem. We sang Danny Boy, and so it was an interesting time. I can remember we had a pre-season camp, and as you do, the end of the pre-season camp, you play drinking games, because we're locked up in this boys' school out somewhere in the middle of, you know, out in the bush, and so we were really fit but really bored by the end of the 2-week camp, and they put a crate of beer in front of us and left us to our own devices. And it wasn't until about, you know, 5 crates later, things kicked off a little bit, and the room divided pretty much based on your religion, and they were really confused with me because my last name's Smith, so they all thought I was a proddy, and but my Brian is spelled with an I, which basically means everyone over there was going, that's a Catholic way to spell, and I'm going, who knows this stuff? You know? So anyway, the room divided. I was standing in the middle, and it was going to be, you know, it got a little bit frosty and feisty there, as a couple of blokes were cheating at cards or cheating in the drinking game or whatever it was. But all's well that ends well. I got out alive.
Ladies and gentlemen, Brian Smith. Now what we're going to do, just before we talk about the World Cup, we're just going to go through some local, just some questions about the game in Australia and some aspects there. I think it's all pertinent to, you know, the growth of the game and where we're at. The first thing about is that a lot of people come in. We've had a lot of the board members speak here from the ARU, and one of the big things I always speak about is the backbone of every community, which is club rugby. Owen, you sort of started to talk about there, but, you know, what are your thoughts are in the probably, you know, what's the right way to go with it? Have we got the right model now? Is it what can we do to improve it?
I definitely don't think we've got the right model. I think AFL have got the right model. NRL are heading that way, and rugby's way off it. I grew up, my father was the president of Waverley, it used to be Waverley Old Boys, but then Waverley Rugby Club in sub-districts. My mum was the treasurer, my brother was the club captain. There was that community feel about your club. Like I said, I played at Randwick. There was investment into grassroots of rugby. I think rugby's gone the wrong way about it this year. Having coached in club rugby in Canberra for the last 4 seasons, the players are actually paying now levies to subsidise the Australian Rugby Union rather than it being the other way around. So I think we're too heavily focused on high performance and the amount of money going into the players, and a portion of that needs to be pumped into grassroots rugby so we get kids playing it. We get families. My kids love playing AFL because they get the free backpack and the balls and the stickers, and when they were in Canberra, GWS used to come to training sessions about 4 times a year, and I'm sure they do it out in Western Sydney as well. And I think with the investment that we're making nationally around the teams and the Brumbies, I know they do a significant role in Canberra, but it's a smaller geographical area, but I think the Waratahs need to get out to the schools. It'll be interesting. We can probably get Smithy's opinion on how many times they've been out to what he just named as a nursery. They should be out there 2 or 3 times a week coaching the junior footies and having a bit more participation. So I think we're a long way away from the polished result that we should get through Australian rugby.
Brian, just coming back from coaching in the UK where the clubs I even went up to my old club the other day, just come out of the 2nd division, hugely strong, very, very well supported and owned by private owners and that sort of stuff. English Rugby Union going strong. It's probably quite hard for you don't know enough about Australian rugby, but every other code in Australia's got a media contract with stuff, so we're now struggling in regards to how we're going to finance that game. Some of the aspects there that Owen was talking about. Any insights in maybe what can work up there might work down here, or what you think we should be going?
Yeah, well, one of the things that really drives the game in the UK is money. It's the RFU is clearly the richest union in the world. They could fill Twickenham 5 times over for any test. So the average price when you look at the corporates, is about £400 or £500 a ticket for a test match. So it's they make ridiculous amount of money. I know what we spent on the last World Cup. I was working for Jono in the last World Cup preparation, and we spent over £5 million preparing the team in one summer for the 2011 World Cup. I know it didn't really look like that on the paddock, but so they've got a lot of money. And what happens is the RFU basically pay the clubs a lot of money to get access to players, and they pay the clubs to develop English qualified players. So the system is all lubricated by the pound. It's a big audience, and it's 60 million people. I know soccer is the big game over there, but rugby is it's very popular, particularly in London and the West Country and Midlands and what have you. So, but it all comes down to the power of the pound. I've got some lads who are asking my advice. They're leaving Scots now and they're looking where they go, and I'm saying to them, whatever you do in these next 2 years, you need to get yourself in a great program, and my advice would be get yourself into a full-time program, wherever that may be. And I'm seeing really talented. We've got 6 boys in the Aussie schoolboys this year, 3 in the first team and 3 in the seconds team. And some of those lads are going to go down to club footy, and I know that what they're going to get at the club level probably won't be as good as what they're getting at the college, because at the college we've got S&C staff that are there for them to do their weights in the morning. We do the review with them at lunchtime. In the afternoon we're training. We've got Andrew Blades doing scrum work. We've got Dave Aldred coming in as the kicking coach, and we're really looking after the boys, and they play in front of 5,000 or 10,000 spectators on a weekend, and they're going to go down and play club footy, Colts, probably in front of 150 people and a dog, and maybe they're going. Do they have a weights program? Probably. Is it supervised? I'm not sure. And I just think these next 2 years for all these boys, they go to from 18 to 20. It's vital for their development. And what I'm seeing in the UK is the boys are coming. We identified them because I was working for a club in club footy in the UK for the last 13 years. We'd identify those boys as 15-year-olds, and they'd be on weights programs, we would send a kick. If he was a kicker, we'd send a kicking coach out to him. If he was a hooker, we'd send a throwing coach out to him to coach him in his school. And by the time they left school, then we'd bring a dozen boys straight from school to come in and train with our pro players. And out of those 12 kids, you'd probably keep 4 the next year. But those boys, you know, let's say he's a young back rower, he would be training next to an Owen Finegan, and the first month or two, he's getting belted around and knocked around, and he doesn't think he's a chance. 6 months later, he probably gets a shot on Owen and thinks, I could do this. 12 months later, 18 months later, 2 years later, he's actually nipping at his heels. And so by the time he's 20, Owen has now got a serious competitor on his tail. And that's what's happening in the UK and Europe, is that those boys are going into professional environments and they're training with the big dogs of the club, world-class players, because a lot of the Southern Hemisphere boys are heading up, as Dan did, to play in these clubs and offer that expertise, and they're bringing players through. And the England under-20s team is nowhere near as talented as the Australian under-20s team, but they've beaten them for the last 5 years, and the Australian under-20 team, last time I saw, got smacked by 40 points against South Africa, and I'm looking at it and just going, what's happening to these kids from the time they leave school for those next 2 years? And I don't know what's happening. I'm going to find out, because I think it's really important for Australian rugby. We've got to do something about that, because I think we're getting left behind.
Great. Dan, Super Rugby, it's obviously expanding that stuff. There was a comment made the other day that maybe, you know, have more quality and less teams, all this stuff. There's all this stuff being thrown. I mean, how are we travelling in regards to, how's Australian teams, how are we travelling at the moment in regards to obviously getting back to the top?
Yeah, I'm sort of in agreement with that a little bit. I think 5 teams might be too many, but in saying that, I suppose contradicting myself a little, you are getting players who are getting exposure to that top competition week in, week out. But it's no good for anyone sort of always being there or thereabouts, but never being able to properly compete. So if you had 4 teams that were genuine contenders year in, year out, my view is that that's a lot better off. And I think the dilution of the Australian sort of club system is also coming due to all the programs that are involved. I mean, you're getting a lot of academy guys that are going to these various clubs, and they're not getting the opportunity to play. They're just being professional players. And I think as a youngster, going through the cult system or going through the grade system in your clubs is pretty important. So if you had your 4 teams, demographically, I'm not sort of debating where that should be, but if you had 4 really strong competitive sides, you had players that were playing for their clubs and getting the opportunity week in, week out to play, rather than training for 8 months of the year and never actually putting the boots on and having a game. I think you'd be in a far better position, and I think you'd also be able to help a little bit of the financial stocks, because the drain on that system, because I don't know how profitable all our super franchises are. If you don't get to the finals or you don't get substantial sponsorship, things become quite expensive. And I think Melbourne went through a pretty challenging time. I'm unsure how the other clubs are faring from a financial perspective, but I think 4 teams is probably the ideal number.
Just had an experience of going to South Africa, and there's just so many games being played now, and they had 10,000 people to a game the other day of Western Province versus Natal, which is like the interstate game here, which is actually ridiculous. When we're looking at the current players now, I went to the change room from our days, and I was talking about the 90s guys that went in there with guys like Tommy Lawton and Dick Cox and a few of the other guys who played over there. The change rooms, the saunas, everything, it's quite amazing. But there must be, you know, what is the game challenging these guys with now? I'll put this back to maybe Brian. You know, what are you seeing professional rugby has done from the time that we were more in, you know, the business side of it, knew what our value was? For some of these guys now, they struggle with. What are the struggles of some of the current professional players?
I think the current professional players, you know, they've got a few things to deal with, but I think they're very fortunate. I mean, to be able to do something that you would do for nothing, you know, and be able to do that and be paid well to do that, I think they're very fortunate. In saying that, it's a pretty short career, and so where guys struggle at the back end of their career are probably those guys who haven't continued their studies or vocational kind of taken measures to ensure that they don't get to the end of their rugby career and go, you know, because by the time they're 30, 33, whenever their rugby career finishes, it's very different from the time they're 23 because they've probably got 2 or 3 kids. They're used to having making good money, and then all of a sudden, if they don't take good measures to work out where they're going to next, you know, guys could be earning a third of what they, you know, were earning as a player, and so that can hit guys pretty hard. But in saying that, the game's probably tougher. I know that at any given time, 25% of a professional team would be injured, and if you had 35 players, you could expect every summer or every off season to have I don't know, 5 to 10 major surgeries. So the wear and tear on the bodies is more than it was certainly when I played. But I think there are a lot of things in place to support the players, and I guess probably the biggest issue that rugby's got to deal with at the moment, I think it's doing a pretty good job, is just this concussion thing. And I'm not sure that, you know, it came in as a bit of a wave, maybe, you know, 12 months ago, and I think there's a little bit more to come. Having seen a lot of the medical reports and those sorts of things, I still think that's something that we need to be mindful of. But I think with some good management by the administrators, I think there's ways you can depower the game. The most obvious one is to cut back on the subs and maybe turn the game back into more of an endurance contest, which it was, you know, sort of in the mid 80s, and so there are ways you can deal with that, and I think the administrators are onto it, and I think we just need to be mindful. That seems to be the biggest challenge at the moment, but I think globally the game's in a healthy place, and it normally gets a big shot in the arm after a World Cup. So
yeah, great. All right, then on that note, we'll move to the World Cup. First of all, Randwick guy, you spoke about him before, Chika. How do you see him? How's he tracking in regards to his tenure so far, Owen?
I think he's done a good job, Michael Cheika. He's having played with him, he's an aggressive Lebanese man that wore his heart in his sleeve, was uncompromising and relentless, and I think he's been that way with the Wallabies. We've seen in the last probably 6 months some good improvement. There's rarely a test where you see the Wallabies push the All Blacks off the ball in their first scrum, but I think that comes from the effort. He knows you've got to be put in the effort. He's had a good track record. I was lucky enough to be, you know, after he coached me in Randwick in 2004 and 2005. I went over to seas and played at Newcastle, and then when I was in Dublin, he coached me there. So he took a team of, you know, they weren't a team of nobodies, but they were a team that never achieved anything, with the likes of Brian O'Driscoll and his cohort. And, you know, within a couple of years, they had won Heineken premierships and continue to do so now. So he set the team on a good trajectory. He's done the same with the Waratahs. I used to love it as a Brumbies players. They're underperforming. Their 3-year plan lasted about 18 years. So eventually, though, he got them there, and it was with that right attitude. It was, you know, he knows how to talk to players. He's probably just as much as a rugby manager. He reminds me a lot of Rod McQueen, one of my early coaches, in the fact that he doesn't think he's an expert on everything, but he gets the experts in. So I look at his coaching assistants on this Rugby World Cup, and you've got Mario Ledesma working on the scrum, the Argentine scrum coach. You've got Stephen Larkham doing the attacks, and then you've got Nathan Gray as a defence coach. And it, you know, replicates in 1999. We had, you know, Rod McQueen, who was sort of, you know, the overseer, but then we had Tim Lane and Jeff Miller as our forwards coach. So they had good expertise around him, and he does a good job. And you know, I heard Matt Giddo interviewed during the week, and he said, you know, what he likes about Michael Cheika is he tells the truth. That's the only thing he does tell. So he wouldn't be saying any of these players that he's resting him, like Vic's got rested in 2003, but Vic's made the 2003 team. To this date, that's probably one of the things that I regret the most is not being part of that 2003 World Cup. So I know how James Horwell and Nick White are feeling, having played in the last Bledisloe, and then 6 weeks later not getting played. So he would have told those players the reason why they're not there, and there'd be it wouldn't have been anything new to them. And I think with all those players, they all know where they stand. And I'm sure that I remember before the New Zealand game here in Sydney, I got the opportunity to present the jerseys to the team, and he could tell me that week, the next week, they were playing in Auckland, but Wycliffe Palu was playing, Henry Spate was playing, Nick White was playing, so they had their plan. And I spoke to Stephen Larkham in Brisbane. They obviously had their plan well before of what they needed to do to the World Cup. So there's been a bit of conjecture on whether he did the right thing in the Bledisloe Cup. But I know Michael Cheika will be marking himself come the World Cup, and I think they're heading in the right direction. And they've got the right people in the right places.
Great. So Dan, we've always been a bit questioned up front. I've liked one thing this year that it hasn't been the starting 8 that's been going well. It's actually the reserves coming on have really had some great value in coming on. You think we've got the team that can go through up front there that can give us that stability and that platform?
Yeah, I think so. I'm pretty optimistic about the opportunities. I think a good thing that we've got in our favour is the fact that we're in a tough pool. I think going through the World Cup and having the opportunity to play each week, like it's a bit of a sudden death match, is a good thing. But in saying that, Wales and England, very forward orientated sides. So I think we need to get it right. And when we do get it right, we do well. But I suppose that one of the keys in the international game is the consistency in your performance. So if we can take the good things that we did in that All Black test in Sydney and we can replicate that on a week-by-week basis, I think we will then have the opportunity to really put our best foot forward. And I think that's what, as Owen alluded to, Michael Cheika is pretty honest and brutal in his approach. I was fortunate enough to work with him when we had the success. And people, as Owen said, no, they want to play for him. He manages the person, not the team. And so he's got a good rapport with all the players, so the forwards will know what he wants from them. There's already a bit of chat coming through with the new Argentine scrum coach that he's very passionate and he wants to work hard, and I think I heard something about live scrummaging all the time, and I think that's the way that you should train. It should be full on, it should be contested, because if you can train hard against each other, when you get to the match, then it's not going to be nearly as hard as that. I do worry a little bit about the line out. I think we've got to basically play smart in that regard, and I think that's why Rob Simmons will be there. And I think with the 2 shorter back rowers, I don't know what the side will look like, but if you've got Will Skelton there and 2 short back rowers, you've got to be pretty clever and astute in your planning and preparation. So whether they play more short line outs, whether they play more of a driving game as they've got to win the ball at the front, time will tell. But I think all in all, if we can get our consistency right, we've got the pack and the platform to go a long way.
Great. Brian, it's one thing about winning the ball, it's about getting the right combinations in the backs. Any thoughts on what that might be?
No, I think Michael and Stephen have been pretty smart the way that they've gone down the route of sort of horses for courses, and I think that'll continue. I've no doubt that Australia's got the most talented back line in their pool. Anything behind the scrum, I think they're a much more talented team behind the scrum than both Wales and England, who are the major threats in that pool. But I would say, I think if Australia's going to go on and do great things at this World Cup, they have to top that pool, because to come second in that pool probably means you're lining up for a quarter-final against South Africa, which means you're going to have to beat England, Wales, South Africa, then win 2 more. And if you top your pool, you're likely to be playing Samoa or Scotland or something, one of those sort of teams where I think you could rotate guys a little bit. My view, just getting away from the backs, and I know a halfback should never be talking about things he doesn't know about, but Stephen Moore clearly has to play every game. Maybe not against, maybe not in the pool stages, but he's got to be there, because when he's there, the set piece is so solid. His throwing is good. The scrum is so good around him. That having coached against Australia, whenever Moore was not available, the English boys certainly enjoyed that prospect. But when Moore is playing, they realise it's not going to be so straightforward. And I think the English forward pack they don't have Corbuseria, who Dan's played with, and he's a very destructive loose head. So that's taken away, and Hartley's their best hooker, and they've kicked him out because he's been a bad boy. So in some ways, I think that England pack has been dumbed down a little bit, and I think I believe with what Ledesma has done so far, Australia can get parity up front, no doubt.
So to answer your question, Adrian, I think Genia will be 9, or should be 9. Phipps will be 10. Giddo at 12.
Phipps at 10.
Oh, sorry, Foley at 10.
So you've stolen the limelight and you've
Kurandrani will be at 13. Adam Ashley Cooper, Israel Folau and Rob Horn would be my World Cup backline.
Check phones Owen to see if he's okay with the backline.
Stephen Larkham does. He's still scared of me. So his nickname when we were playing was Bernie because he didn't have a personality. Yeah. He was like that bloke from the movie Weekend at Bernie, if anyone's seen it. It's like going out with a dead person. Yeah. You can always tell a lot from a person's nickname, though. Yeah. So obviously mine was Melon because I was so sweet. Will Greenwood, the great English centre, he was the lighthouse in the desert because he was brilliant but fucking useless.
Well, you know, sometimes it's highly astute here. You sort of ask a backer something, he starts talking about front row play, and then we've got Owen talking about the backs here. So just one thing I'd like to do is just to actually add a little bit of flavour to the night. In our pool, there's one of the great nations of rugby, Wales, playing, and I just want to invite a great friend of mine, Ben Evans, come up here. Yeah.
I'll be able to do that. I think Moose, did I mention Waverley Rugby Club when I was speaking earlier? Yes, and Ben Evans is now the coach of Waverley Rugby Club, head coach. Still playing. I don't know why, but you are.
Yes. So Benny, what's the drum beating from back home, mate? How are Wales looking at the moment?
I think there's a few arses twitching a bit, to be honest. You're not going to dress it up any other way. It's because I think the guys, will reiterate this. When you play against a good team, one of the biggest things is you play against a team, and in the opposition's team, there's a couple of players who stick the willies up you, really. And I think it's that experience, and I think it's that level of experience across the Welsh team. And you've got a few, but you need more, I think. And I think what the Welsh team are going to be lacking, I think, is a couple more big characters. Just some real big men. When it gets tough, the big game for us, I think, is going to be the Fijian game. The Fijians have been together for, I think, 2 months. Alan Roland has been in the camp. And I'm sure they will be looking at their discipline. There's some cracking highlights on YouTube where I think they had a red card and 2 yellows, and they were playing an international with 12 guys. You just can't win that way. So if Fiji bring their A game, they will scalp. They'll scalp someone. My fear is it might be the Welsh team, or it could be one of the other top 2 teams. It is the pool of death for a good reason. I personally think those top 3, Wales, England, and Australia, I think there's a fair chance we might beat each other, and then it'll come down to who can really stick some serious points on teams like Uruguay and possibly Fiji. But yeah.
Great. It's great to have a front row up here to level the playing field. What's the... obviously, the Southern Hemispheres have dominated the World Cups. I suppose a bit more reflection there. Brian, you've just been up there. Ben, you just spoke about Wales and that sort of stuff. I suppose, where do you see the threats coming from the Northern Hemisphere? Obviously, England's one of them, but France on their day. I mean, you know a lot what's going up there, but certainly at the moment, England the last couple of games haven't been hitting their straps there. So what are the threats to the Southern Hemisphere?
I think the French team, that's one of the it's one of the biggest teams I've ever seen. One of the biggest teams of all time. You know, they've got 3 or 4 Will Skeltons in their squad. They're absolutely, if they get it together, they can be dangerous, and they've probably shown in World Cups that they can be a rabble off the park but put it together on the park. So you could argue they were pretty unlucky against New Zealand in 2011. So of the Northern Hemisphere teams, I just don't think this England team will be a force at this World Cup. I think the next one, if you ever look, their average caps is like the low 20s. Only 7 of their squad have ever been to a World Cup. So I can't see, I can't see them being there at the back end, but I can see France being there at the back end. And I think the 2 big injuries that Wales have just had might scupper their chances as well, as apart from the fact that Australia are going to put the cleaners through them. So, so I think for my money, the European team is France. Is the danger team.
I think Ireland have been consistent. They were second in the world more recently until they lost to England. They played the All Blacks last on the Northern Hemisphere tour, and the All Blacks scored a try after the 80th minute to beat them, or to draw with them. Missed the conversion, and the referee gave them a second shot because he said someone broke out early. So I think the Irish have got although they've never beaten New Zealand, they've got a belief, and I think they've won the last 3 Six Nations championships over there, and so they're consistent. I think we spoke earlier about what Michael Checker's done over there, but a lot of those blokes that are now playing for Ireland were starting off when Michael Checker was there. The Jonathan Sextons, the Jamie Heaslips, and a couple of those players from Leinster that have given what was traditionally a Munster forward pack a bit more grunt. So I think I think Ireland will probably be the bolters for the World Cup, and they've got a good pool, and then they'll be on a good side. So if Australia was to win their pool, they'd end up playing Ireland in. If you looked at World Cup rankings, they'd be playing Ireland in the semi-final.
If anyone knows Ben, there's going to be he's a walking passion monster, huge. One of the things, Ben, you watch the All Blacks. We'd have to probably say they're pretty well aiming. They've aimed up pretty well, picked a good squad. You obviously see them as the benchmark of the World Cup, and you understand some of that passion, having played them a few times, what they're going to take to the World Cup. Yeah,
massively. There are some players, when you face the haka, it either energises you or it takes something away from you. And I remember playing against them at the Millennium Stadium, and on the 59th minute, we were beating them, and we had a 4-point cushion on them. And I think a couple of us actually looked at each other and we thought, we could beat the All Blacks here. We genuinely could beat the All Blacks. And then they run in 4 late tries, and it just blew us out the water. But that's the thing that they've got. I think they're cool, and then they're calm, and then all of a sudden they just go through the gears, and then they'll just blow teams out of the water. And that's what they'll do. It's very rare that they'll get caught with their pants down. Like, Australia has done a job on them, but if anything, that has probably spurred them on a little bit more. Yeah, that they are human and they've got to keep their feet on the ground. So I think losing that one game against Australia has probably made it worse for everyone else, if my honest opinion.
What happens at World Cups is we've got a tremendous amount of experienced players going, and then we've got a tremendous amount of experienced players leaving. We've had this sabbatical arrangement now where you play so many tests, you're allowed to play for Australia. We've certainly got a lot of experience leaving. This is from you, Dan. We've got a lot of experience leaving the Wallabies, but we're okay. I mean, the thing is, Chica's probably got to now go get some maybe younger guys to harden them up and bring them on.
That's an interesting question. I don't have an issue with it. I think that's one of the reasons why you play this game. I know it's professional now, and a lot of people, loyalty, etc., but I think that's one of the beauties about the game we play. You can go overseas, you can go play in different countries, you can experience different things. And with guys like Gitz and Drew Mitchell and a few of the others who've come back now, they've been able to bring something that they've learned from another rugby nation. And I think the guys that are leaving at the end of this year, they've done their time. They've given a lot to the game in Australia, and I think they've every opportunity to go and enjoy some time playing in a different country. But I suppose from a development perspective and younger players, you want to keep them on shore. So I think they've got it right. I don't really know how else to answer it.
I think most of the people leaving are Adam Ashley Coopers, Wycliffe Parloos, so they're not going to be here for the next World Cup.
Yeah,
So I think it's actually it's great that they're heading off, and Adam Ashley Cooper's been a great servant, like Drew Mitchell. So the people leaving, there's a couple that'll go that could possibly be in the next World Cup, but very few of them. And I think it's just you got 3 or 4 years to build in some other players. I think I know you asked Dan before about the Super Rugby, but I like the idea of 5 teams, especially when I look at the Otago Highlanders this year who won the tournament. They've been perennial underachievers. You look at that team, and there aren't too many All Blacks in that team when they were playing, and they played some fantastic football. So I think if you get the right coach and the right culture in some of the Australian provinces, some of them teams will be a bit more successful than they currently are. And I think there's enough depth, and most of the blokes just want an opportunity. There's another, probably 100 blokes that are playing NRC that'd love a chance at Super Rugby, and I think keeping 5 teams, eventually we'll get to the stage, but dropping back to 4 just to be more competitive. Queensland, they've all had their time, but they just need to be more consistent, I think, in the right environment with the right culture and the right coach. So if you could replicate somehow 5 Michael Checkers, you might have what the Waratahs have done in the last couple of years, and that's what the Australian Rugby Union should be looking at. Look at the Reds; they've had a pretty ordinary run, and they've signed the same coach on. So I can't see anything changing there in the next 12 months. But you look what Michael Checker's been able to do to the Waratahs in 2 years. What Stephen Larkham's done off the back of Laurie Fisher, and I think Australian rugby's in a good space if they get the right coaches.
Yeah, but you generally have the best players playing for those teams that win. So if you got that combination of your players, if you can't get that group of players spread across your various teams, I question whether you can do it. But I see your point. You get people who are exposed to Super Rugby week in, week out. It's a hell of a lot better than people not being exposed to it.
Well, that's why I preface it with the start is the Highlanders didn't have those players, but they could win the Super Rugby Championship, and Rebels were competitive, and they've got Tony McGann's been there a couple of years, and they're actually heading in the right direction. There's some really positive things coming out of it, but and them other teams have got the opportunity to bring in some international players. They just haven't picked the right ones. Could be the next Dan Vickerman coming over to Perth next year as a young South African.
Just a bit angry, Owen.
Okay, we're just now with the live streamer. Obviously, last questions. I suppose all of you guys have played in the Rugby World Cup. Is there any story or anything that really stood out for you about preparing for it, being part of it, moments, anything like that? Owen, anything that you want to share from us, from your experience, other than...
I was lucky that we were still sort of semi-amateurish. I remember in 1999, we were, our first night in Ireland, we were at Port Marnock, and we had a golf day, and it kicked on till about, the golf day started at 11 and finished about 4 o'clock that morning, with Joe Roff naked at the end of Rod McQueen's bed. And so unlike Dan Vickerman, he got selected the whole way through the tournament. But the great things are, and the other highlight for me was then winning. Obviously, the week leading up to the World Cup final, the Australians were voting on the Republic, and John Eales said something in the press that then got taken the wrong way, and it was John Eales was voting against the Queen. And then later in that week, then he had to go and select the trophy off her, and it was a very frosty encounter. And I was just saying to Brian before, Tim Horan was about 3 or 4 behind John Eales, and he actually said to the Queen, "John mightn't have voted for you, but I did." So you always remember those highlights, and obviously for me, still to this day, we did our victory lap to U2's "It's a Beautiful Day," and I come from a land down under, and they're still 2 of my favourite songs. And I just hope in 1999 we won the Cricket World Cup, we won the Netball World Cup, and we won the Rugby World Cup. In 2015 we've won now the Cricket and the Netball, so it's just the Wallabies to bring home that treble and repeat history.
Well, great. So look, just what we're going to do is just, again, thank all our partners, the Auto Club, Kinship, Thomas International, Rhino Sports and Burbank for supporting us tonight. The live stream will now finish, but what will happen is actually